So I want to talk today about a game that's currently going on. It's what we're calling a curated game. It's been being played live by middle school aged kids all around the world. Started 4 weeks ago and has about 3 or 4 more weeks to go, depending on how quickly they move. I'm not going to be doing most of the demo, but I just want to tell you a little bit about the idea. We started in conversations with the Smithsonian a number of years ago about ways of advancing the museum's mission beyond its 4 walls, particularly because the Smithsonian is a national museum, and yet many people never get to Washington. What I like to do when I'm thinking about doing a game in any field, those of you who've heard me talk before, is to try to find a game that's inherent in that work. And so the first step of sort of doing this work with the Smithsonian was that my colleague Jason Haas, who's in the back, and I went down and started talking to Smithsonian scientists about what they did and where the fun was in what they did. And frequently they don't know what we mean by fun, but if you start to probe and talk about the things they think about in the shower or when they're jogging, you start to get sort of where the fun is and all this stuff. And it was so we were having these conversations, and it was a particular conversation with a paleontologist. And one thing I remember was, talking about the event, the extinction event that we all have come to think caused the end of the dinosaurs, the asteroid, and learning that in fact that was still a subject that was sort of in play. There was no question that there was an asteroid, there was no question it had an effect, but there were lots of other things that may have caused it too. And the actual interplay of those was very much something in contention. As you thought about it, it was kind of like a logic problem. On some level, it felt a lot like a game, which is not surprising because, again, if you've heard me talk, I argue that all games are science, in which you encounter things that are chaotic, you gradually through observation and probing, you make sense of them, you form hypotheses. And so that it made perfect sense that we should do a game about in which kids got to be scientists and getting to do the kinds of problems that this paleontologist was telling us about. And our goal in this game is really not to teach kids any particular bit of science content, but rather to get them to identify with what scientists do, to understand that it's cool, that it might be something they would want to do, or at very least to understand what scientists are doing, even if they don't become scientists themselves. And to have an identification with museums and what museums do. So with that very quick introduction, I'm going to also introduce Dana Tennyson and Caitlin Feely, who are really the muscle behind this game, the muscle and the brains behind this game. And they're going to sort of tell you, the game is called Vanish, they're going to tell you sort of how it started, how the game actually played out for the kids who are playing it right now, and where it is at this point.
So, Caitlin, are you muscle or brains?
I'll fight you.
So, I'm Dana Tennyson. I'm the senior programmer, sort of the technical side of things here.
And I'm the project manager. I handle a lot of logistics and basically everything that doesn't involve programming. So. But we both work on the design.
So we advertised two kids that MIT and the Smithsonian were going to put on some sort of scientific mystery. And kids signed up in advance, and on the first day, they went to the website where they had pre-registered, and some things had been looking a little funky on the pre-registration site before we launched, but the first day comes up, and there's this corrupted-looking video with 3 MIT students introducing themselves. And, oops, just need to actually get this to play. Volume. Yep.
It's up here.
Nothing there.
Okay, so they're talking and saying things are going kind of wonky on our site here. And you may have noticed up in this area here, every once in a while some, there you go, some letters are appearing. And the students are completely oblivious to this. It stopped playing. Give it one more try here. Set the embedded flag.
So, welcome back to Vanishing, buddy. I'm the trooper.
I'm Terranot.
And I'm isolated.
And we run into a small snag with our game. Well,
Our server unexpectedly crashed.
And it rebooted on its own. We've also been getting these weird messages on our website.
So-
It looks like we've been hacked or something.
and, well, we can't run what we were normally planning to run. So instead, we're going to ask you guys to come help us figure out what's wrong with our website.
We're starting an investigation.
So join us on the forums and help us figure out what's going on.
We'll see you there soon.
So on the website is a section of forums. Here's our "We've been hacked, what's going on" forum. And the kids started posting into it. And this post is by a player named Poke Guy, who mentioned that I'm seeing these letters in my message. It looks like maybe it's a coded message being sent to us. And he gave this point of data that he had. And other players started noticing that they had different messages showing up in their videos. And Cheese Girl here came to eventually realize that there was a Caesar cipher involved here, and told the other players that you just need to experiment with the different Caesar cipher options to figure out what your little bit of coded message is. And from there we went into a data collection mission where all the kids were submitting to the site what they were seeing coded on the web page, and they all worked with the Caesar or the rotation cipher to figure out what was going on. The different messages had different rotations. And then there was another data mission where we then collected all these decrypted fragments. And the players had a flash game that we coincidentally had around to do famous quotes that I, at the last minute, rejiggered for the kids to put together this message. And in the end, Amgene here was one of our leading players in getting all these different parts together. And here's an example of some of her work along the way in figuring out what all these different, roughly 10 character fragments were. And as the kids got it all together, they got this.
If you've cracked this code, you're the people we need. My name is Jasper, and I am contacting you from the future. I'm an engineer on Project Phoenix, our first attempt to communicate with the past. It is our hope this transmission will be transcribed onto computer network protocols in an earlier era such as yours. A catastrophic event occurred in the past, our past, your future. That event, which we call the Epoch, destroyed most of civilization's written records. We know little of what life was like before the Epoch. We don't even know when the Epoch occurred, or what it was. We need your help solving this mystery. Dr. Lincoln, lead scientist on Project Phoenix, believes weather patterns changed as a result of the Epoch. We need a map of daily temperature data in your time to check this hypothesis. Please upload this decrypted message and the map. We will be monitoring the server hosting this message for your response. Our next communication will arrive in 9 days.
So that's a pretty, I think that's a pretty exciting premise for a bunch of middle schoolers who signed up expecting some kind of educational game and found themselves talking to the future. By the way, I thought I'd mention that this cryptography challenge that Dana put together, we showed this to 3 different PhDs, including one in ancient languages, who claimed that it was impossible and there was no way that 12-year-olds were going to solve it. And I believe the term is that they got schooled. One of them is my husband, so I feel okay saying that. So the idea behind this sort of, as you can see, we have a lot of different activities that we're doing here. And while they kind of feel like the sort of thing you do where you're solving a mystery, running around, gathering evidence, putting it together, trying to make sense out of it, really it's what you do as a scientist. There is a problem, you don't know how to solve it, you need to collect data, it usually involves collaborating with other people, you need to try to make sense of that data, and you need to put an interpretation on it. So there were one or two kids who said, I thought I was going to come here and do science instead of breaking codes. I'm like, well, you are doing science, you just didn't realize it. So now this game was based on a genre of games called alternate reality games, which you might have heard of. And I don't mean alternate reality like you put a helmet on and you see a scene that's there. These are games that they're often done as a marketing ploy, and they're the sort of games where there's a rabbit hole that you go down, and you end up finding a series of clues and stories on websites, and you end up having to collect clues in the real world and try to piece together a narrative. These games can be really compelling. One of the problems is that often a very small group of elite players ends up driving all the investigation, and we didn't want to do that. You can, let's see this. This wedge here tends to show which is kind of typically used to illustrate the level involvement in ARGs, kind of shows that problem. You'll have the kind of casual people who sort of sit back and watch. You'll have people in the middle who do a little bit of interactivity, but it's the tip of the wedge that often gets a lot of the problem solving done. Now, there is a merit to that, to having a smaller group of kids out of a group of thousands do a lot of the problem solving, because kids will often learn much better watching their peers solve a problem than by having it demonstrated to them by an expert at the front of the room. But that said, we still wanted to try to broaden the tip of the wedge here and get more kids actively involved. So Data designed a task where an absolute minimum of 99 players were needed, because there were 99 parts to the message. If 99 players didn't upload figure out that they had a section of the code and upload it, they never would have solved it. And in reality, we had nearly 3,000 players on our first day, and an enormous number of them were involved. We had thousands of posts trying to solve this mystery on the first day. So the level of engagement across skill levels, across levels of reading comprehension, etc., is really high. So we have this contact in the future. We have characters. We have Jasper, this engineer who's trying to contact us. We hear about Project Phoenix, which is this group that's trying to contact us in the future. And then we have the big thing, the epic, which is a disaster that has happened in the future. It's something to do with climate. So we have a data mission. You've got to collect climate data. And so kids now go out and they use whatever method they feel like using. Some kids chose to use actual thermometers in their backyard. Some kids used a local weather forecast. Some kids just went out and collected it in one day. We had one kid who was collecting temperature 4 or 5 times a day, every day for 8 days. So kids got very into it. And then what we thought was really exciting was that there was like, well, how are they going to know? We're using zip codes to locate where we are. Do they even have zip codes in the future? We need a map. We need this. We need that. They were, really thinking very seriously about how to make data easily interpreted by a scientific community. The next step, so anyway, they send their temperature data to the future, and sure enough, the scientists were like, yeah, we don't have zip codes in the future. So they ask us, and they also say that in the future they use different units of distance and temperature, and a different coordinate system. So we need kids to start calibrating that. So I decided to be really mean, and I gave the kids a message from the future where they said, well, here's an astronomical constant that you can use to calculate to calibrate your units of distance to ours. We use something called megatriums to measure distance, and the mean apoapsis of the 4 primary moons of the 4 moons visible with basic optics of the primary gas giant in this solar system is this number in megatriums. I showed this to people and they thought I was out of my mind. What that is that they gave you the apoapsis, if you don't know, is the maximum distance from the center of an orbiting body to the center of the body the center of the whatever the satellite is revolving around. And of course, primary gas giant is Jupiter, and the 4 moons visible with basic optics are the Galilean moons. They figured that out within 6 hours. And then we had to scramble to give them other things to do. As you can see, they figured out very quickly what the apoapsis was for each of the 4 Galilean moons, and worked out the equivalent of how much a trium was in kilometers. So you have astronomy research, a little Wikipedia, nothing wrong with that. Don't say you've never done it. And so then the other question was that this was a relatively, comparatively simple. We told them that they'd use a different temperature scale in the future that was based on the freezing and boiling point of ammonia rather than water, or whatever Fahrenheit is based on. Fahrenheit not being based on water. So the kids immediately went and figured out what the freezing and boiling points of ammonia were, worked out a conversion formula, and then started asking really interesting questions like, well, did you mean anhydrous ammonia? And I'm like, I don't know, did I? But then they started asking interesting questions like, why would they use ammonia as the basis for temperature in the future? Is it colder? That's an excellent question. As you can see, Storm, that's Dana, is, so the TARDIS here came up with a formula that was just slightly off, and all it took was a little nudge from Dana to make sure that it would work with the data points that we had. And that was all it took for TARDIS to go back, check her work, and get a perfect formula. This is a little out of order, but so this is another excellent question. And someone points out why is a megatrium so big? How big is their planet? And someone pointed out, well, mega is 1 million, so trium is probably relatively short. By the way, trium is 2.3 meters. So we've established now that we have these conversion formulas, we've established that it's colder in the future. And let's see, just look at my notes here for a second. So we've established that it's colder in the future, and we start hypothesizing about why. So one of the popular theories was supervolcanoes blocking out the sun. Another one was that the magnetic poles started wandering and that this somehow had an effect on the atmosphere. And they started to do a lot of independent research on what could have caused this. And here we have someone explaining a really complex concept of how you might look for a geological record of a major event like a volcanic eruption, and explaining it in terms that their peers can understand. So we've got a lot of peer-to-peer teaching going on, really complex concepts. And here we have a similar one. Here, Wildrose is referencing a conversation they had with Dr. Liz Cottrell, who is the head of the Global Volcanism Program at the Smithsonian. Every week we have a Smithsonian scientist. We have over 5 weeks. We have a Smithsonian scientist get on and answer whatever questions the kids want answered. And subsequently, we had one of the kids say, "This was so much fun. I really appreciate that she talked to us like adults." And another person said, "Yeah, I can't remember the last time I tried to talk about something this complicated with adults, and they took me seriously." So as you can see, we're throwing out all these really complex scientific concepts, and you might ask, well, what about kids who don't necessarily already have a good understanding of those scientific concepts? How are they going to gain that knowledge? We have several different ways of doing this. Up here, you can see a group of us merrily working away on the first day of our game. That's a group of MIT students who are basically mentors who work with the kids online to help nudge them along. It's not their job to answer questions for you, but to give you the tools to figure out where to look. We also have these video conferences that I mentioned. Here's Dr. Cottrell talking to the kids. It was last week. And then we also have museum events. Museum events are where you get a little clue that leads you into a museum, and you might meet with an expert and talk a little bit about ecology or space science or something else that's relevant to the concept at hand. So that's the real world element. And the fun thing about that is that it gets kids really engaged with museums as opposed to some other museum outreach programs that just focus on getting the kids there and maybe doing a scavenger hunt or writing a report about what they saw. It doesn't give them the motivation to try to think about why that information is important. We also have the series of flash games. Each one teaches a different scientific concept. Nate's Swamp Hunt is a game that teaches, it's this treasure hunt game where you have your units of distance in, say, surfboards, but all you have are trombones, and you need to convert surfboards to trombones to find the hidden treasure. And it's games like this that, they're not a part of the narrative. Nate's Swamp Hunt is not from the future, but they do help kids understand a concept that they need in order to move the mystery forward.
So I'll just end with saying for a moment here where the kids are right now in the game. We're halfway through it. The kids have recently discovered that an asteroid strike did caused the epic, and it's several hundred years in our future, and the correspondents in the future are wondering, well, why didn't you stop this advanced civilization that you are? And one of the puzzles is that we gave the kids 6 different crater sites on the Earth of the future and some geological information about them, and asked the kids, okay, can you rule any of these out? Can you figure out which one it is? And this came out just a few days ago. We're a month into the game, and Bad Band 4 here jumped in with first post ever by this player saying...
We've never seen this player before.
So we're still getting new people in saying, here's where these locations are on the Earth. I've done the conversion. And then we had Shushu come in and start talking about different craters that were found that already exist, and starting to refute different hypotheses that kids have been making based on the geological data. And it's coming together. You've got 3 craters left to figure out. And the next broadcast from the future is May 4th. With that, I'll turn it back over to Scott.
So, the first rule of designing a game is hire really brilliant people. When I talked to Claire and Wendy about doing this, I said, we don't know if this is going to work. I was kind of anxious about it. And said, so I may be talking to you about failure, but that'll be a worthwhile thing. I'm happy to say that I'm not here to just talk about failure. Two things. I want to tell you what my big takeaway is from this. There's a story they didn't tell. Early on, one of our more dedicated, part of the fiction of the game is that there are these documents that are being released slowly by an artificial intelligence. Don't ask why. Early, one of our most dedicated players figured out how to hack our site and got all the documents and posted a note to the other players that he had all the documents. And of course, we were actually moderating it all because of the age of them. So we were able to step in immediately and say, please don't distribute them, And he didn't. And he agreed not to because he's a good guy. But he'd already put out the message that he had them, and so he basically then said to the group, I'm not going to put it out because really we want to keep the fiction of the game going. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And the kid said, yeah, don't mess the fiction, don't mess up the fiction. So I just want to point out that these kids know, they get it's fiction. But they are totally, and I think of it as like that age when you know Santa Claus isn't real, but you and your parents still talk as if he's real for that 1 or 2 years that you do that. They're so thoroughly into the fiction that they're happy to play along with it. And it just reminds me of the power of projective imagination. That giving kids a chance, by giving kids a chance to be imaginative about this world, to project themselves into this world, to be creative in a thing, is also getting them to do really hard science. And that if we think about kids learning, if we're not thinking about getting their imagination in gear, we're missing the boat. If we're not sort of asking them to be imaginative as they do stuff, we're just leaving. We're sort of saying, check your brains when you walk into school because we're not. So anyway, so that to me was the big takeaway. I feel like I can never talk about stuff like this without sort of giving cautions because we don't know. I don't know yet whether we crack the problem of drawing in kids who weren't otherwise interested. It's a problem with the only way to get PR for this game was to tell the story that this is a Smithsonian MIT game, and that may have selected only kids who were inclined. So if we get to do this again, the next challenge is to figure out what other ways can we draw an audience in so that we might get kids who didn't know they were interested. Well, I don't know for a fact that that's all we've got, and we're going to do a lot of post-processing of the data. We've collected a lot of data. So we may be able to establish that we don't, and also looking longitudinally at individuals, we may be able to say that these are not just all science kids who are doing this. But that to me is the big challenge left to resolve. But in any case, we're having fun. Anyone can go and register at vanish.mit.edu. If you're honest about your age, which I hope you will be, the game will just make you a watcher, which means you can see everything that's going on. You can even play the Flash games. You just can't post. But I encourage you to do it because it's just extraordinary stuff. The only other thing is these kids are much better behaved than adults are. We only had one troll out of 6,000. Now we're up to 6,500. We only had one troll, and a handful of kids who had to have their wrists slapped just to be reminded to be better behaved, but nothing serious. So, anyway, you have questions for the three of us?
Just
One question. I know you guys.
Just a question about the marketing of it. 6,500 people, that's a pretty decent number for what seems to be a fairly narrow scope thing. How did you farm those people? What was the, or how, are you getting any data about how people are coming to this game?
We have some.
Yeah, we have some Google Analytics.
We got several players through the Smithsonian website, but still most of our initial traffic is people who directly typed vanish.mit.edu into their web browser. So it's got to be mostly the news stories that went out, the places that mentioned us but didn't provide an online direct web link.
Yeah. By the way, Vanish is now the #1 search. The game is, if you type Vanish on Google, we come up first. So. Yeah. One more. Did we? Yeah. Okay.
When and where are the kids playing this?
So the kids are playing 24 hours, well, 18 hours a day. We don't moderate. Posts don't appear during the evening because we're not at night, overnight time because we're not on. But they're playing it mostly in the afternoon. It appears to be. It's not a school. Although lots of teachers have encouraged their kids to sign up, it's not a school game. It's for informal. And so it's mostly in the afternoon and into the evening that we're seeing the players. But we do get kids logging on at 8 in the morning. So.
And we do get kids who log in during the same hour every day. They're clearly playing it in a specific class at school and talking about, oh yeah, I can work on this, but I can't play the Flash games because I'm in school right now, and things like that. And I'll also just note, since Caitlin didn't mention it, that those museum activities, we've got 20 Smithsonian affiliates across the country, each doing their own thing, all designed by her. And so it's really widespread across the country, and we've even got international players.
And if you go to the forums and you look at the threads about museum challenges and you read what the kids who went to museums come back and report, and like Caitlin said, we're not doing scavenger hunts. We're not saying look behind the potted palm on the 3rd floor and find a message. We're saying find out about keystone species. And the kids are going to the museum and sort of exploring it and writing about it. So anyway, really worth looking at.
So it seems like you have a very, you thought up an elaborate story and are sort of doling out the clues. I'm wondering how often the kids have found problems in your story that you had to correct on the fly, like pneumonia.
Actually, it wasn't a problem. That was actually an intentional. There's a lot of the story that we haven't told you, and we're not because we don't want to show up on YouTube.
Right.
But
they haven't managed to poke a whole lot of holes in our actual science. One of the great things is that we had access to these Smithsonian scientists, and we ever needed to call them up and say, so how precisely can you date a meteor crater anyway? They were there to help us figure that out. I don't think, I think so. That pretty much they've never actually poked holes in their science, although they did ask us a lot of questions we did not anticipate. The thing about, for instance, magnetic pole wandering as a possible theory for climate change, I never would have expected that to come up. It's limited in its scientific validity, but it suggests an understanding of how the geology of the world works that I would not typically expect a middle schooler. So it was really exciting to see questions like that. So,
by the way, just talking about sort of age, so these kids are 10 and a half to 14. We were sure that one of the 3 leading hypotheses for global cooling was going to be nuclear winter. No one mentioned it, right?
Yeah, it turns out if you don't grow up during the Cold War, you're not worried about that.
Yeah. We should yield the floor, but
yes.
We're around, so please feel free to ask us questions.
One of the great